Hi, everyone. So wonderful to see you and to spend time with you this evening. My name is Katerina Stoikova. I'm the founder and senior editor of Accents Publishing. We are an independent press in Lexington, Kentucky, and we're 11 years old already. Every other week, more or less, we plan to bring you an author of a book published by Accents Publishing and focus on this author and that book for an hour. So far, we've featured in our Accents book series, Accents book club series, we have featured several of our brilliant books. The first one we started with was And Luckier by Lita Kendrick, and we have Lita today with us. Then we featured The Junkie Who Loved Horses. That's anthology of poems edited by Sonia de Vries. And this is the book that features poems by formerly incarcerated men. Then after that, we met Christopher McCurry and we talked about his book, Open Burning. Then Frank X. Walker appeared and talked about his new book, Masked Man Black. Then Eric Sutherland, talked to us about Earth is My Church. And then we closed the year with, with contributors of our Literary Accents print magazine. And before we go to the book and the author of the hour, I want to tell you that towards the end of the month, I think is what it's on the 27th, January 27th, we'll meet with Karen Schubert to talk about The Compost Reader. So now we'll talk about Sirens and Rain by Barry George. And Barry and I go way back. I met Barry in November 2007. I know that because we had just started together the Spalding MFA program, and we were placed in the same workshop with Greg Pape. By the time this first residency was over, we had become friends, and we have been friends ever since. And there is another dear friend of us here, that's Barbara Sable, and she started together with us as well. So by the time we graduated from Spalding at the end of 2009, Accents Publishing was about to be created, and we had decided to publish Barry's first chapbook of haiku. This is it. This is the last copy I have. Wrecking Ball and Other Urban Haiku by Barry George. We did those by hand. I personally printed every one of them, and we bounded them in our living room. So that was fun, and I'm so glad that I have this one last copy of Barry's book here. So that book immediately became a bestseller, and I believe it would have continued selling very well, but we discontinued the practice of making books by hand. It just wasn't sustainable. Now, however, this lovely book, Sirens and Rain, is professionally printed and is widely available for everybody who wants it. Ask Barry about the cover image. He took the photo himself. You can ask him a question during the Q&A. So we'll have opportunity to ask questions. Barry George sees with the eyes of a poet. You cannot photograph those moments in time if you have not developed the gift of seeing the emotional significance of everyday events. Life constantly flows through and around us. The poet needs to sharpen the senses to recognize the magic in the seasons, in the umbrellas, in the caring gestures. More than 100 brilliant haiku, organized in 5 seasons, take us on a moment-by-moment journey through life in the big city. We feel lucky to be able to see through the eyes of such a sensitive poet. Poem after poem brings out the essence of how human activities blend seamlessly with nature, says Tom Clausen, and he's with us today. I just noticed his name. In 3 lines, he paints a scene as contemporary as Edward Hopper strikes notes as American as Aaron Copland, says Jeannie Thompson. This book confirms that Barry George is among the best of haiku poets, says George Swede. I agree with all 3 endorsements and add that Accents Publishing is happy and proud to once again be the home of Barry's brilliant haiku. Please help me welcome poet Barry George. Barry, you'll need to turn on your mic.
Thank you so much, Katerina, for that introduction. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for publishing my books. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It's great to see people from various places and times in my life, and old and new friends, and I appreciate so much your interest and support. Sirens and Rain, as Katerina was saying, is a book of haiku about life in Philadelphia as I've experienced it over the years, mainly from the vantage of Chestnut Street, which is in Center City, Philadelphia. And the cover, let me see if the cover photograph is of the intersection of 20th and Chestnut, which is near where my wife Heidi and my cats Avi and Naya and I lived for many years. More recently, we've moved about 5 long blocks away, but the feeling is still very much the same. And that feeling that I have is that Philadelphia is the ideal place to see life in all of its diversity and forms, both human nature and what we refer to as nature, to the extent that we make a distinction between the two. And as you'll see in my book, I don't make that much of a distinction between the two. There is in the Japanese tradition a difference between senryu and haiku and senryu, S-E-N-R-Y-U, which is essentially about the difference between nature and human nature. Maybe we can get it into the questions perhaps, but for my purposes, it's pretty much all of one piece in the kind of poetry that it is. The book is arranged by seasons, beginning with summer and ending with spring. I've added a 5th season, which will come up second under the chapter title, Cicada Season. This is more of a traditional Chinese idea than traditional Japanese idea. But to me, that is true to the way I experience living and writing, that time of late August, September, early October is rather distinctly different from high summer and high autumn. So I would invite you to join me now as I read selections from the book, taking you on a guided tour of the sights and sounds and the various forms of life in the city of Philadelphia. 1, heat warning. First skyline, a single window pane reflects the sun. City dawn, window washers rise on their scaffold. Lone jackhammer rings in the morning, the heat. Street vendor carries pineapples up from the cellar. Heat warning, the cat's shadow rises over his bowl. Expert deposition, folding and unfolding his surgeon's hands. Counting his pennies in the lunch line, the comptroller. The coxswain's bullhorn floats down river, summer day. Long afternoon, again at the blinds, the wasp's shadow. Extended drought, the wake of a goose drifts toward shore. Slow conversation, a passing bus fills the diner window. After the storm, he is rich in umbrellas, the homeless man. Rower's statue, raindrops hang from his oars. The cat reworks his litter, summer dusk. 2, cicada season. September dawn, the almost silent lap of river oars. Cicada season, jackhammers begin the day shift. The white and whiter shades of a fountain, cricket song. School crossing guard walks home with her stop sign. River trail. The shadow boxer whirls through the maples. North Philly mattress store. The sign above still says Joe Frazier's Gym. Hawk letting the wind just play. The diva's eyes, as if listening. High over the falls, a heron spreads the wind. Sidewalk stoop, winos recall the same forgotten oldie. Night mist, police edge out over the falls. Noisy hallway, the signing class saying goodnight. A light in the boathouse, the long room for the skulls. Three, moon gazing. Night meditation. The cats roll my bronze Buddha. City skyline, a chill today in the shadows. Pink begonias deepening the gray fall. Unweeded, overgrown, I sit among them, autumn marigolds. Fall morning, sequins sparkle on the girls' hijabs. The darkness of long empty stables, Quaker meeting house. Overcast sky, the wobble in a distant V of geese. Chalk drawings, longer rays of autumn cross the square. In the late sun of a rose garden, he shadow boxes. November wind scattering even the crow flock. Police wake, the cathedral steps gathering blue. City of phones, the lost art of talking to oneself. The vagrant reading with someone who isn't there. Cloudless sky, the moon at the window of the Space Museum. Eclipse, the cats look away in the windy night. 4, midwinter sun. Daybreak, the outline of the city on Venetian blinds. First flurries, both cats strike hunting poses. Someone shouting a long way off in the snowstorm. Wintry day, the bootblack reads the paper with a magnifying glass. Freezing drizzle, the colorful serape of a homeless man. Not quite the tailors I had hoped for. Moths. Musty and somewhat worn around the edges, the used bookseller. December sky, flying into and out of itself, the crow flock. I was here before, beneath the sycamores of winter. Midwinter sun, too close, a loud crow caws. Gulls cry, my thoughts far inland too. Sidewalk Valentine, a heart chalked around worn initials. Faint footfall, the cat walking slowly toward daybreak. 5, bowing to dandelions. Muddy river, a statue's image struggles to the surface. Early thaw on my favorite student's arm, a crude tattoo. Morning shade, the parking guard's basso warms the sidewalk. Back streets, the diva's warm-up rises above Sirens and Rain. Windy March, his trouser legs ripple with the jackhammer. Off to school, a father and two small umbrellas. Sudden rain, a quickening clatter of heels. The campus in bloom, my crush on the new general counsel. Park statue, a French general bowing to dandelions. Easter morning, even the beggar's hair is combed and parted. Priest raises the wafer, my third eye. South Philly in spring, the hoagie shop's signed picture of Stallone. Railroad boxcars scrape along the tracks, a night of cherry blossoms. City lights, I'm overtaken by my second and third shadows. Open door, the darkness lengthens into a kitten. The stylist rinses away the sound of her voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, for walking us through the haiku of this book. And now let's have questions and answers. And you guys feel free to ask questions. If you don't, I have a few of my own.
Well, I have a comment. It's not so much of a question, but reading through the book, and first of all, I love the book. It's wonderful. Congratulations to both of you. And it was great to hear you read the haiku, especially the ones that really moved me. But I was really taken with the lens that, and I could really hear it. I mean, I could really appreciate it when hearing you read the lens that covered so like a cast of characters. There's policeman, there's the dentist, there's the homeless person, the crossing guard. There's like it's a whole representation of a city, you know, and then nature comes into that too. It's a really wonderful blending of city life through observations of people and then also the nature. So anyway, it's a lovely folding in of human, the human element in a cityscape and also of nature. So bravo, Barry.
Thanks, Barbara. I think I owe most of it to Philadelphia. As I was saying, it's such a small, big city in a way, although they're building too many high rises now. That'll be in my next book. It's a town that's walkable. It's a town where everything is out there in the open, and nature is all around. The parks in the city, and also the vast Fairmount Park, which I believe is still the largest city park within the bounds of a U.S. city. And so many of the poems too were written on my bike rides around the Schuylkill River, out one river drive and back the other. So it really has been an ideal place for this kind of observations of all different aspects of life. And I mean, I'm glad you mentioned characters too, either in a generic sense or in a more symbolic sense of seeing a particular character or group of characters. So that's something that really appeals to me to kind of capture. To me, capturing something about a person is somewhat akin to the idea in haiku of the moment, you know, of capturing the moment. What is the moment at which you capture somebody in the act of doing something that is kind of representative of that person in a very special way, maybe perhaps an archetypal way, for lack of a better word.
I saw a question. Go ahead. Go ahead. Mike.
I really appreciated the book when I received it, and you're a great ambassador for Philadelphia. I really appreciate your tender perspective of urban life and your fondness for nature too, and the way you integrate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Philadelphia is a kind of tough city in a way, but it's a tender city too. Yeah. You know, that's the part that most appeals to me. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring up a question that I see in the comments from Paula Behrens. Could you talk about your process, individual poem sets?
Yes. So I write mostly from observation as I'm going about, and I don't carry a notebook. I know, for example, Tom Clausen does do that, but my haiku are either remembered, I can remember one or two at a time till I write it down, or scribbled on the back of a receipt or Mac withdrawal receipt usually. And so most of them are written as I walk around. Some of them are written in the middle of the night. I sometimes get on a roll at night, and those are more from memory or imagination. That's kind of a really enjoyable time when for some reason the poems come to me. Also I think writing on the kind of routine trips that you have. For example, my 15-minute walk to work and back each day, I can usually come up with a few poems to and fro, and then it's important to write them down. Same with the bike ride around the river drives. I mean, I used to say that I'd like to come back with a few haiku, like fish in my teeth. I'm not sure how that metaphor is playing now, but I kind of like it. So I can remember some short ones. However, what I want to say that it's not totally on inspiration and walking about. It's important for me to have a list, a master list that I keep on my computer, and then write them down. Usually they're written in my notebook first, then on the computer, and that's where I do what I call work the list. I mean, I may do revision. I decide what poems to send out to journals. I demote certain poems that don't seem to be going anywhere to my B and C lists and move them around. So to me, they're kind of the two parts to it, the going about or the having of the inspiration, because it's, after all, a short form. It doesn't take a whole lot of work. It comes more in an inspiration in the first instance, but the work needs to be done in keeping your list, revising them, seeing what you have, sending them out to journals, seeing what works and doesn't work. All of those things have gone into the writing. And I would say too, also reading wide, part of my practice too is reading widely in other people's haiku, both traditional Japanese masters and current English language haiku poets, some of them whom are in the audience. What I always like to do is pay attention to something new that I see somebody do, or see somebody do something that I've had in mind to do, but didn't know how to do it. So to me, all of that's part of the practice of haiku writing.
Hi, Barry. It was wonderful to hear you read your poems, and I recognize some of them, and I've loved those poems for years. and congratulations on your book. Along the lines of the last question, I was wondering if your creative process has evolved from the earliest days of writing haiku to now. Do you notice any changes in your observations, or what you're attracted to, or like a form of doing it that has evolved in some way?
That's a very good question. And I probably can only give a partial answer because I'm not sure. I know for one thing, I'm in a pretty big dry spell right now. So I think when one is in a dry spell, it means that you're kind of casting about, maybe for a new direction, or maybe just recharging. I would say that one thing is that I tend to read more of the Japanese masters daily than I used to, as opposed to as to other contemporary journals. I still do that, but I seem to like to go back to the masters and see what they're doing. Otherwise, the main thing I would say, it's kind of just a challenge to stay fresh and to kind of find new ways of saying things, because you may have, I think there's always creative ways to say something about ordinary phenomenon. I think really that's kind of the essence of what haiku is in many respects, of seeing something special in what otherwise might escape notice as an ordinary moment. But to continue to do that in fresh ways and new ways is a challenge. And so I think mainly it's just kind of staying on my toes, and maybe also kind of being willing to like part ways with the kinds of poems that I used to write and see if there are new ways that come to being.
Hey, Barry, it's Michael. I just wanted to also share my congratulations to you for the book, and to say, so I grew up in Philadelphia and still live nearby, and I love living in Barry, Georgia's Philadelphia, which is to say, so, you know, my own experience is very much shaped by the poetry that you write. I certainly would not be capable of creating those snapshots that so shape my perception of the place that I live. So not only are you a great ambassador for Philadelphia, which indeed you are, but also for a Philadelphian, you're someone who creates a lens that one, you know, that's sort of more of a contact lens, and that exists in the eye of the reader. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, Mike. For everyone, Mike is my Sunday morning tennis partner of long standing. So I would say, Mike, that that you've influenced me as much as kind of helping me understanding kind of what a true Philadelphian is as well, and how he sees Philadelphia. So part of it may be that I'm borrowing your eyes or some of your experience to see it. So so we've had a very fruitful interaction over the years, including being educators, but that's for another conference.
So I have another question, Barry. I know you've got a little bit of a rebel spirit in you. Do you see yourself as sort of bucking the traditional haiku tradition a little bit, with, you know, bringing the focus, you know, indoors or to the city street? And then also I was really just had to smile when I saw that you had 5 sections in here. Is there a little bit of a pushback against the traditional standards or forms of form of haiku, what's expected from haiku with your work, or is that just is that the case, or what do you think?
You know me too well, so I don't know how much. I don't know how much to reveal, but I do see myself as a little bit of maybe something of a rebel. Well, I would say this. I mean, to me, I think being a poet is both knowing a tradition and being somewhat iconoclastic, being original, and finding the balance to be that. And you can't really be an iconoclast unless you understand the tradition well. But having said that, I think that my urban haiku, as I call it, and my poems about people is somewhat of a, I'm not sure it's a complete rebellion, but it's I think my own style that sometimes gets caught between haiku and senru. In other words, just so briefly, haiku we kind of think of as about nature, and essentially it is, although in the traditional Japanese, it has plenty of it's people by people as well. And senru is more about humans and human artifacts, as they say. But I see, and senru tend to be more ironic, perhaps more objective, less, more humorous than reverent. But I think writing poems that really capture the essence of individuals, sometimes in a rather serious or reverent kind of way, is something that's very much in between traditional ideas of haiku and senru. I think you can find some examples of poems like that by plenty of other poets, including the five Japanese masters. But I still think it's a unique kind of form that I like, to work on. And I think too that I think some of the poems that you'll see in the journals tend to be formulaic sometimes, of a background and then some observation that's linked to a person in a certain way. And I mean, I'm saying that that sometimes I think there's too much of that, and it's more of like wanting to challenge myself and perhaps challenge others to find other ways to do that. So so in that sense, I think I try to be an innovator, and that appeals to me. At least that's a goal of mine. And maybe the urban haiku is the main initiative that I have in that sense, and have the opportunity to do, being a town and country boy, who's been transplanted to the city for most of his life.
Barry, did you have other favorite titles, other titles in the running? I really like Sirens and Rain. I like the rhythm and the sound of it, but what else was there, or was it just this one?
You mean for the title of the book? I mean, I thought of Chestnut Street because that's not all of the poems take place on Chestnut Street, but that was the base of my operations for going out from there, whether on foot or by bicycle. And that's where, the kind of the hearth and home was, with my cats and all of those things. So I thought of Chestnut Street, but I thought that might not work as well, wasn't quite as poetic. I also thought of 20th and Chestnut. I think Pete Dexter, or one of the Philadelphia writers, has a novel that's the intersection of two streets, and I thought of that as well. Those were the main ones. Those were the main ones I thought of. Do you think of any? Can you think of any others?
I really think that you made the right choice with Sirens and Rain. I mean, it's beautiful and memorable. Here is a shout out from Katie Yoakum. She,
oh wow,
yeah, she just, her audio is not working, but she wanted to call out her favorite haiku. off to school, a father, and two small umbrellas. It's one of my favorites too. And there is a question by Paula Behrens. Did visiting Japan affect your work?
That's a very interesting question, Paula. So I traveled to Japan about 6 years ago now,
Yes.
and with a group from my college, Community College of Philadelphia. And so to get to the point, the answer I think is basically no, much to my surprise. I'm not sure why that is. A lot of time I was bewildered by language in Japanese, and our focus was more on the religious sites, the various temples and shrines that are both everywhere and magnificent in other places. And in many ways, I think I was just kind of spellbound by all of that. And for whatever reason, that didn't give rise to many haiku. On the way back, a long plane ride back, two colleagues of mine, I think one of them may be in the audience, Elizabeth Catanese and Dave Prejnar, and I wrote some linked verse about a particular shrine that I think worked pretty well. But that kind of was a kind of historical, religious kind of writing. So the same kind of seeing things and knowing how to give expression to them in language, I think didn't happen to me in Japan. It was wonderful to be there, but and maybe in ways that I'm unaware of or that are more subtle, that experience began to seep into what I've done since. But I was kind of surprised that it wasn't like a haiku festival going there, and that may well be a lot of the reason, because that the focus was religious. And I really got taken away by that, but very fascinated by that.
Barry, I wonder if you could describe the time that you came to be in love and engaged with this short form poetry.
Right. So I was exposed to haiku in 4th and 5th grade, I believe. And I think that many people are. And at the time that I was going through elementary school, I'm pretty sure I've read since that there was some kind of particular movement of bringing haiku to teaching that to elementary school teachers and so forth. So I was fortunate to have some elementary school teachers who taught me an appreciation not only for haiku, but also for poetry in general. And so that experience always stayed in the back of my mind. I wrote poetry from about that time of other kinds, from about that time on in my life, from somewhere around 9 years old, with maybe a hiatus in junior and senior high school where I was more concerned with other things. Maybe it's not a particularly reflective time for people like me. But what I realized over the years, I continued to write haiku, and what I realized was that I continued to write poetry. My poems got shorter and shorter over the years, to the point where about, what is it now, about 25 years ago, I thought maybe this is haiku, and I checked into the various haiku journals, and the most prominent then are some of the most prominent now. In particular, Modern Haiku and Frog Pond were the ones I looked into, and some others. And I found out by submitting poems that what I was writing wasn't haiku, but was close. But was close. And first of all, I really valued, there were some editors, Robert Speece in particular of Modern Haiku, who encouraged me. And just reading the other haiku, I realized that I was very much attracted to the values of haiku, that I was gaining an understanding of what the poets were going for, what made a good haiku, and that became my my goal to take what I was doing and make it into real haiku. So for about the last 25 years, I've focused on haiku, and with Senru to the extent that there's a distinction, and also tanka, which is a 5-part relative of haiku. But it was really that process of in writing poetry of seeing that I wanted to say things as sparely as possible, and I think perhaps as brief. See how much I could say briefly. There's something wonderful I once read that the playwright Tom Stoppard said. He said that poetry is the contraction of form and expansion of meaning. It's the contraction of form and the expansion of meaning. And whether or not that applies to all of poetry, I think that's a very good definition of haiku, that haiku is a way of contracting language, of putting it in its most essential, while at the same time seeing how much meaning you can invest it with. I think that's really maybe the grandest challenge of it. And I think to answer your question, Debbie, I think that's always the challenge, to find new meanings to put into haiku, whether it be subject matter or ways to use the form to express distance. Busan was somebody who had the magic of expressing great distance and also historical perspective. And so it seems very very little that that 3-line form, but to find ways to invest it with different kinds of meaning, I mean, that are also meaningful to you and what you want to say or what you see, I think is really the the beauty of the challenge of writing haiku.
I have another question, if it's okay. I know that a lot of haiku poets write a death poem, and that they work on this poem for years and years and years. And that's an example of, as you live, taking in new shadings and new observations, but working and reworking the same piece through the years. And I'm wondering if it's not too personal a question, or if you're willing to talk about it, if you have worked on this yourself and how it has grown through the years for you.
I think that so not quite in the way that you've mentioned of being really conscious of that, but I think what comes closest, not really to a death poem for me, but maybe to a to a autobiographical poem at this time of my life, is the one that goes, unweeded, overgrown, I sit among them, autumn marigolds. And I mean, to me, there's some way in which I'm kind of identifying with the marigolds so much that I'm one of them, and I'm I'm unweeded and I'm overgrown, and I no longer care. I'm beginning not to care about that, and entering into one of the later chapters. So I think that that's a good question, and I think it could be death poems or markers along the way of autobiographical poems that I imagine haiku poets have as well. There was, by the way, a collection of legacy poems, I believe he called them, by I can't think of his last name, Robert. Maybe somebody could jump in, but I don't know.
Epstein. Robert Epstein.
Yeah, yes, Robert Epstein. Robert Epstein invited haiku poets to submit something in the nature of a death poem, of a poem that they wanted to be remembered by, or that they thought was emblematic of them so far. So I think it is very much on the mind of haiku poets.
Barry, I'd like to congratulate you. You are not only a wonderful person, but a fantastic poet. And your words mean a lot to the world. And I thank you for them.
Thank you, Clarissa, for that encouragement. I really appreciate that.
There are a couple more questions here in the chat from Rika Inami. She asks, what Chinese thoughts have influenced you and what haiku Japanese masters have inspired you? And I'm sorry, I cut somebody off. After that, you ask your question.
So I would say that, I mean, so as far as Chinese philosophy, I don't know it well. I spent quite a bit of time in my more uncertain years throwing the I Ching and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with my life. So so to that extent, when you do that, you really do get a fair amount of exposure to that I Ching is brilliant. So as far as Japanese poets, the four masters are very influential to me, and I find more in them each time that I read them. I like best the translation of R.H. Blythe, which was one of the first ones. He was a British translator, and I find probably I like to read various translations, but I go back. He has a 4-volume set that I make my way through in the course of the year. And so I think there's something really, really different and special about each one of those haiku masters, who are Basho, perhaps the more spiritual haiku poet, that in a word, Busan, who had a beauty and a way with words, and also some other qualities of the historical imagination that I mentioned. Issa, who was highly experiential, maybe almost modern in that sense, of writing from his own experience, writing from the less appealing parts of him as the appealing parts, not trying to be a hero in any way. And then Shiki, who I think is a rather brilliant turn of the 20th century master, who brought haiku up to integrated some with more modern types of poetry that were about, and there's something very penetrating about Shiki's poetry. So there are other poets as well. I guess I'd like to mention one contemporary poet, although there are many of them, but one poet that really influenced me when I was first writing was a poet named Cor Vandenhavel, who was an excellent poet and has written the Haiku Anthology, which is one of the Bibles of haiku writing.
Thank you, Betty. We have time for one more question.
Barry, I love your book and I love your reading from it. I was just curious, did Heidi enter into offering offering feedback on very many of your poems in this collection or in the collection itself?
Yes, yes. So Heidi was very helpful as far as looking at. So part of the process of organizing the book was selecting what ones were candidates to put into it, and so I showed those to Heidi, and she would say some were great, and she'd say some, get rid of that one. You know what I mean? That's terrible. And so, and I do have to say that I reserve my right to override her idea as well. So she's important in that respect, and many others as well. But then also at the stage of arranging the order, the sequence, I think she has a good way of understanding that, and also can help me to see where maybe there's something that's not working smoothly as it might. But yes, I mean, she's a great, she writes some haiku herself, not as much as she should. I think she has a good ability for it, but she does have a really, I think, fine ability to understand what I'm trying to do and give me some advice about when she thinks I'm succeeding with it and when to go back to the drawing board. So yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us for this installment of Accents Book Club series. It was really enjoyable, Barry, to hear you read and to hear everybody's wonderful questions and to spend an hour talking about Sirens and Rain by Barry George. Thank you very much, and hope to see a few of you in 2 weeks for a conversation about the compost reader. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this hour tremendously. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.